Welcome back, Ty and That Guy. I'm John Wesley Chatham. This is my good friend, part-time lover, Ty Franck. Hello, say hello to our millions of fans, Ty.
Hello, all 8 of you. I love this low, rumbly, sexy voice you're putting on right here. We got some.
I've been thinking about it, and I don't know if we have a lot of female viewers, or male viewers that would appreciate it. But I got to throw a little something out to them too, Ty. You know?
Yeah, no, I'm appreciating it right now.
I love it when you appreciate me. It's about time.
Oh, hey, speaking of appreciating, I just got this the other day. You know what Dan Nowak bought for me? And just like without telling me, and it just showed up at my house.
What?
Dan Nowak bought me the Nerf M1A1 pulse rifle from Aliens.
Did he really?
Yes, he did. It's sitting right over there. I got my Nerf pulse rifle.
Is it your birthday or something?
No, just showed up. I think it was a drunk purchase. Dan was just like,
yeah, he probably came across it. And he goes, he just
ran into it. He's like, right Ty needs to have this. Yep.
Yeah.
And it has fully functioning Nerf machine gun part, but also the fully functioning over-under 40mm grenade launcher.
But what does it shoot underneath it? What does a grenade launcher shoot?
A big Nerf thing.
So there's different sizes of Nerf that the thing.
Yeah, there's the little machine gun Nerf, and then there's the big grenade launcher Nerf. Yeah.
So how many times have you mowed your wife down or your cats in your house?
When I opened the box, the very first thing I did is I opened the box. Janae was there watching. I immediately loaded the grenade launcher and shot her with it.
Hey man, that's that's her fault for being, the only one in the house. You got to shoot somebody
for being there. Yeah.
You get a new Nerf gun. Somebody's getting shot.
Somebody's getting shot. That's just how it works.
Well, I'm back home and it feels good. It feels good to be back home. Feels so good.
Yeah, you've been working hard, man. You've been filming a bunch of shit that we'll talk about someday in the future when it gets announced. But it's very exciting stuff you've been working on. But I finally made you do something I've been trying to make you do for years now, since I've known you.
Mm-hmm.
And that is watch movies by my favorite classic Italian horror directors. Very excited about this.
And the one you're talking about specifically is Dario Argento.
Yes.
And the movie we're talking about specifically is Suspiria.
His masterpiece, Suspiria. Yeah.
And, Ty, there's a lot of times in our conversations, you go deep into what different country or cultures horror movies and how they express what's going on within them. So what do you think Suspiria specifically, but Italian horror movies express about the Italian culture?
Well, and it changes depending on the time period you're in.
Well, then let's talk about the golden age of Italian horror.
Well, we've talked about the fact that sort of like the slasher movie, we talked about Halloween last time, and that period, that 80s, early 90s slasher movies were very sort of like Puritan in their subtext, which is if you're having sex, if you're smoking pot, the faceless killer will kill you. The way to survive is to be the good girl, the one who doesn't smoke pot and all that stuff.
So the high school me would have been murdered 20 times over in every single film that I played.
Yes, you would have absolutely been. You would have been one of the first ones to go.
Exactly.
Because you would have been the jock douchebag. That guy always gets killed first.
I might have been a douchebag. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so this period of Italian horror, this sort of 60s, 70s Italian horror, to me, and this is my opinion only, so I'm not stating this as empirical fact for everyone else, but for me,
everything that comes out of this podcast is empirical fact.
Is empirical fact. That's correct.
And I'm still butthurt about my buddy JD saying that we're not curing cancer. How the fuck does he know we're not curing cancer? Happiness and laughter has been known to cure cancer. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and I mean, who the fuck is JD? What's he doing?
Yeah. What cancer is he curing?
Yeah, exactly. But so this period of Italian horror for me is all about sensuality.
Mm-hmm.
The death scenes almost could double as sex scenes. The person being murdered writhes in an almost erotic way. Not this specific movie, but there's another movie from this period where a woman is being murdered and in really horrible ways having pieces of her body cut off. And while it's happening, she's writhing and moaning. in a way that could almost be like porn. And there are several scenes in this movie, in Suspiria, that I feel like have that sort of sensual aspect to the death scene that crosses this weird sort of like pain as pleasure kind of idea.
Mm-hmm.
And I really feel like the Italian horror from this period is definitely about the sensual horror, the almost sexual horror, rather than the puritanical horror of the United States. So I watched all these movies when I was much younger and didn't have much sophistication in that. But I remember watching them and thinking something very different is happening here. This isn't like what I think of as a horror movie. Yeah, horrific things are happening, but the way the movie makes you feel is different, very different than the horrific things that happen in, say, like, Friday the 13th movie or a Halloween movie. And so for me, that's what it is. It is this sensual horror is what's happening in this period of Italian horror for me.
Yeah, it's interesting because I was watching this in my hotel room and it was loud.
Yeah.
And some of those kills, I was like, Jesus, I had to turn the thing. I was like, for sure, everybody thinks I'm watching porn in here.
Yeah. Yep.
Like the way it did not sound like somebody was getting murdered. Yep. And that's very intentional because in Italian films at that time, I don't know if they did it for effect or if it was the most expedient way or the most efficient way to do the sound, but they would do the film almost completely without any sound, and then they would go back after and they would put all the sound in after. They dub all the lines and everything after, which to me seems like insane. So the killing and the moaning and all, that's very specific. That's very intentional. It wasn't like something that happened in the moment. This is very crafted, the sound of what's happening when they're killing. And it is, you're right, it is very sexual. What's interesting though, within the film, I mean, I don't know if I got the TV version or whatever, but I didn't see there was no nudity or anything like that in there. I don't think there's any sex.
I don't think there is any nudity in Suspiria.
Joseph, did you watch Suspiria?
Yeah, I did, and I did not see any nudity either.
Yep.
And when I first saw it, I was pretty young, so I don't think my uncle would have rented it if there was that in there. So,
right.
I mean, death and gore, though.
Yeah, so it's definitely not about nudity, for sure.
Well, but the reason I say that is because it's interesting because when you first start watching it, it's so sensual. It's so sexual. The movement, the clothes, the way people talk and speak. But it's all about behavior. It's not like it's like within their DNA. It's how they breathe and how they move. It's not like in the States where it's like we're sexual because we fuck each other. We're sexual. Sensuality goes in all aspects of your life. And the way they drink, the way they eat in the movie is very stylized in a sensual way. So when I was watching that, I was like, man, there's going to be some sex going on, and no sex. No nudity and everything, which is interesting because it almost makes the sensuality within how they eat and drink and walk and dance and move and communicate with each other way more palpable, way more powerful.
The violence is the sex. And that is what
that's what gets you off, Ty? Huh? That's what gets you off, buddy? Is that why this is one of your favorite movies? I fucking knew it. I knew it. I board last week, and
you love me some murder.
Love you some murder.
Love me some murder.
Film. You love you snuff films. You want to do tying that guy on some snuffies, don't you? Well, we don't do that here, right, buddy?
No, but that's the point. Is that the
what if there's an award show called the Snuffies? Where like they awards. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Are you drunk right now?
No, I'm not. Okay. I'm delirious.
Yeah, you're delirious from exhaustion. I understand that.
Yeah.
My point about this period of Italian horror is that the violence is the set. It does this weird thing where it lays sex and violence over the top of each other so they almost become indistinguishable from each other. And if that sounds creepy, it is. But that's part of what makes these movies so disturbing. When you're watching like a Friday the 13th movie, the girls go to the cabin with the guys. They're hanging out by the lake. Pretty soon, both the girls take their tops off. And, you get the boob shots. Then they're rolling around in a sleeping bag. Then that's over. That ends. And then Jason shows up and he kills them all. So the sex and the violence are very separated from each other. Whereas in these Italian horror films, they kind of feel like they're the same thing. It's almost like taking your top off and rolling around in a sleeping bag is the thing that kills you, rather than a faceless killer comes and kills you later. That's sort of more the Italian version. But I want to really quickly, because maybe not everybody has seen Suspiria, so I really want to quickly sort of lay out what the movie is. So Suspiria is ostensibly about a girl who gets invited to a very exclusive dance school, ballerina school, goes there, and all kinds of weird shit happens at this school. Several of her friends are killed, and it turns out that the school is a front for a coven of witches, and that these witches are doing these rituals to try to summon this ancient witch named Suspiria. No, Mother Suspiriorum is the name of the witch, but that's where the title Suspiria comes from. But saying that, so that's sort of what the movie's supposed to be about. But the reason that I want to be really clear, that's what's ostensibly about, is because while that maybe, if you wrote down a description of what the movie's supposed to be about, that's what you would write down. But once you're watching the movie, it's almost impossible to track that plot, because once she gets to the school, the movie becomes a dream. It becomes like this weird fever dream of things that sort of seem connected to each other, and then scenes that don't seem to be connected to anything else. And it really does feel like she has fallen into this nightmare world where very few things make sense anymore, where all kinds of random stuff seems to be happening. I've had people tell me, well, Suspiria doesn't have a plot. I'm like, it does have a plot.
Definitely has a plot.
But the plot kind of doesn't matter, because what matters is this girl falls into this weird fever dream world and is trapped inside of it as all this weird shit is happening in this school. And I actually think that everything about the movie, you talked about how deliberate the sound is. I think everything about this movie is incredibly deliberate. Not just the sound. I agree on the sound. The music, which has this weird sort of harsh, discordant, jarring. I love Goblin is the
Goblin,
band that made the music. I love that, and they did several other movies as well. That it's got a tune to it. It's not it's not just noise. It's got a tune, but it's this weird sort of like jarring, discordant sort of tune.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's incredibly deliberate. The other thing that I think is incredibly deliberate is the cinematography.
Yeah.
So one of my favorite things about Italian horror from this period is their use of light and color. Because if you watch horror movies from the 50s and even the early 60s, they tend to be even when color film became the norm, horror movies stayed very grayscale. They stayed very dark and very sort of almost black and white, even when there was color. What these Italian guys started doing with the Fulcis and the Bavas and the
Tivoli was this guy, yeah.
Yeah. What they started doing is this use of bright, almost garish color. Really bright, almost sickly greens and bright blues and bright reds and bright yellows, which you never saw in horror movies before this, or at least I hadn't seen in horror movies. Especially in this movie, I think that use of bright, kind of garish color gives it that feeling of being a dream. So, you watch color movies and they're trying to replicate real life. This goes beyond replicating real life and goes into replicating something that could never be real, right? That is too colorful for reality. And I think that for me, that feels like a very deliberate choice to create this feeling of being inside of a dream while you're watching it.
For me, it felt like a dark fairy tale. I mean, or just a pure fairy tale. Like if you go back and read some of the original fairy tales, like if you read the original Rumpelstiltskin or you read those original things, they're dark and they're demented, and it's like a dream. There has dream logic, and the dreams are symbols for deeper truths within those. And when I started seeing the film, I realized right away that oh my God, the pure sensation of watching the film, the sounds, the color, it's aggressive. The rain, when she gets off the plane, it's the rain pouring down, and it already starts with anxiety and tension before you even have an understanding of the story. And I disagree. I think it has a pretty clear linear plot that goes through it. And I am a sucker for somebody that we know, that we trust, entering a strange world. And that world on the surface looks normal and should be normal, but there's something off center. There's something off about it. And you know that something is just not right. And the person that we know that enters that world, who we're investigating that world through, starts to uncover and unravel what's underneath it. And in this case, it's something very dark, very sinister. And that meanness and that darkness pokes through the surface and through pressure when it's not ready yet, and then it retreats and it goes back. And even in the, even in the dressing room with the dancers, and they're talking about so-and-so and, oh, he doesn't have any money or he has money. It's like extremely weirdly materialistic, which you later find out goes back to the witch and the leader of the covenant. There's some stories where, like we were talking about Black Phone earlier, which we will do a podcast on, where I immediately connect to a character and root for a relationship. And then I go through this linear narrative with this character and I go through the ups and downs and everything with it. But then there's some where the whole movie just wraps itself around you, and the atmosphere and the culture of the movie is what's terrifying and rattling you. And that's what Suspiria does. As soon as you go in, you're aggressively assaulted by sound and color and the initial kill, the first kill where they fall through that pane glass window and it's a close up of stabbing that heart. And you see that initial kill and you're like, Jesus Christ, like the amount of time. And I mean, this is an art film that you're watching within a genre. And you're seeing this and you're like, how are they going to keep killing people this beautifully and this elaborately? And how are they going to keep raising the stakes? Because they're starting off right away with this amazing kill.
Yeah. And I think my favorite kill in the movie is the one that makes the least sense. And I think that's, and it is the one that most makes me, let me tell you my history of Suspiria. I think that'll be useful. So I was a little kid when this movie came out. What year did this movie come out? Hold on just a second. 77. So I was like 7 when this movie came out. And there was a commercial for this movie where it was the back of a woman's head. You just saw black hair and she was brushing her hair. And this voice said, roses are red, violets are blue. And it was like doing that sort of, that nursery rhyme or that little snippet of nursery rhyme. And then you come around to where you can see the mirror she's holding and see the face, and the face was a skull. For some reason, 7-year-old me was fucking terrified of that commercial. When that commercial would come on TV, I would flee the room. I was so scared of that commercial. And I don't know why that is. To this day, I don't know why I was so scared of that commercial. So I remember when I was a teenager then, and my friends and I were like trying to watch every horror movie ever made. And one of the movies that we got was Suspiria. I had that visceral memory of being terrified of that commercial. And watching it even at like 12 or 13 or whatever age I was when I watched it, I was waiting for that skull to show up, right? Like I was like, my 7-year-old me was still scared shitless. And of course it never does. That scene from the commercial is not in the movie. But because of that, I watched it with this very heightened sense of tension, like higher than I would normally have had watching a horror movie. And so I had a very intense experience of that movie the first time I watched it. And that may be why it had such an impression on me. But I didn't understand it at all. Like it made no sense to me. It just like I had this intense experience of watching this movie. Then when I went back and watched it later, when I was like in my 20s and I had a lot more sophistication, a lot better understanding of how movies work, then I started to see the craft of it and the intention of it. But I still had the sort of emotional memory of the intensity of my first viewing of it. And so that movie has always occupied a very special place for me. But it was during my second watch of it that I realized this sort of fever dream aspect to it, that things are happening in it. Like the first time I watched it, I was like, I don't understand why any of this stuff is happening. And then the intention of that being that it is this fever dream, that you're inside of this nightmare world where things don't have to make sense. And the kill that I'm about to talk about is my example of that. So there is a scene in the movie where a girl is crawling through these sort of hidden back spaces in this house and falls into a room filled with barbed wire.
Razor wire.
And winds up writhing around almost sexually in this room full of razor wire as she's cut to pieces by the razor wire and dies. If you look at that from like a logical point of view, why the fuck do they have a room full of razor wire that you fall into when you're crawling through things? That doesn't make any sense. But once you realize that the entire movie is a nightmare, that is a perfect nightmare moment. It makes perfect sense as a thing that would happen to you in a nightmare. Like I watch that and I go, I could see this happening to me in a nightmare. Like I'm crawling and I'm cramped and I'm claustrophobic and suddenly I come into an open space but it's full of razor wire, right? That feels like the ultimate nightmare kill. And it's still to this day the most visceral moment in that movie for me. And again, a moment that exemplifies what I was talking about, how this Italian horror is this weird mix of the sensual and the horrific at the same time. That scene is that scene. She's writhing around like a woman in ecstasy and moaning as she's cut to pieces by the razor wire in this room. For me, it's like a moment of pure genius in this film.
Argento talks about being really profoundly inspired by Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, the 1933 Disney movie. And Luciano Trivoli was his DP in this, who was also Antonioni's DP in The Passenger. And so if you see, like in that scene particularly, the kind of the blues and the reds and the things on the wall that are kind of layered, and then when she is high, the kind of the weird shapes of the place that she's in, and then there's like random things that wouldn't be there that she stacks together to crawl up and then crawl through that thing. So visually and art direction, and they created, like, when you see this is like, it's like American Ninja Warrior in hell, right? You know, like they have those obstacle courses and you go through, and she's like trying to figure out problems, but it's like a spider web. It's like when you're in a dream and you're trying to run and your feet start sticking to the ground. Yeah. So it's like when she starts finding, oh, there's a secret passage. Now I'm away from this thing, but wait a minute, now I'm locked in this weird room, and then I climb up to this and this and that, and that, till I'm literally swimming in razor wire, and it's so painful to watch, because normally if you land on razor wire, you'd be like, oh crap, and you wouldn't move, and you would try to slowly like walk carefully. She just went like it was like a swimming pool. She was like just like army crawling through this thing and moaning and raving, and you're like, oh my God, and you're in this thing. And it's a fever dream, but it has just enough of a narrative, of a through line where you're following the story through. It's not just completely abstract. I mean, you know that this is a covenant. Although, like, what they want with the main girl that gets in there, I'm still not 100% clear on that. I don't know if they were trying to recruit her and they realized, like, no, she's too strong-spirited. Which, you know, with her being strong-spirited, which brings me to another point. Like, a lot of people accuse... And after seeing this movie, if you go back and read some of the reviews, that Argento was a misogynist, you know, that there's a bunch of women in this movie and they're getting murdered brutally. But I see this and I think, like, in some ways it's really progressive. I mean, this is, the women are the ones that control the action. This is, you know, one of the person that occupies the hero position and the person that occupies the villain position are all women. There's no man coming to the rescue in this. All the men in this are very few and they're despicable people. You know, except that, you know, one dancer.
Well, despicable and incompetent.
Yeah,
the women have all the power in this, for sure.
In terms of her having an arc where she changes and progresses as she is, it's more about she was misunderstood in the beginning, that the people around her thought she was a little bit naive. She's this, you know, dancer coming in or whatever. But what they didn't realize is how strong she was and how resourceful she was. And she's the one at the end that holds it all together and figures out the secret and takes out the main witch at the end. And so, you know, I know, like, I'm talking about drawing that conclusion from this movie, from the movie that's saying that. I know he's given some interviews and stuff like that, but I think this movie, I don't get it from this movie.
Look, if you're making the argument that a guy who grew up in the 50s in Italy has a little misogynistic tendencies. I mean, if you're a man growing up in the 50s in Italy, you were probably surrounded by a fair amount of misogyny. It was a very male-centric culture. I mean, most of the world was at that point, but Italy especially, very sort of male-centric. So I mean, I'm not going to argue that point. I think this movie on its own, I agree with you. This movie, as it exists as a work of art on its own, does place all of the power in the hands of the various women. That the hero is a woman. Like you said, the villain is a woman. The other characters, the support characters are all women. The men tend to be incompetent or despicable and are barely characters to begin with. So taking Argento out of it, as, you know, whatever his personal views are, the thing that he made, I don't think is a particularly misogynistic work. I think this thing on its own is something other than that.
His art in this case does not represent that. And that was,
I don't think it does.
That was reviews about the movie, and they were leaning into that women were getting killed and it was almost sensual and sexual or whatever through the thing. One thing that I did find kind of inconsistent was, or I mean, obviously it is that fever dream, but the first girl that escapes and she goes to her friend's house and she's in there and it's, you know, the first kill that I was explaining earlier, but there was like this beast's hand that like grabbed her and pulled her, and it had hair on it and like long fingernails and things like that. Now, was that Helena Marcos? Is that the main witch, or what beast is that? Because we don't see that beast again.
You don't really know. I've always thought it was the caretaker guy, that it was him, that the witch, you know, turns him into that when she needs to use him for something.
He's like a shapeshifter. Yeah.
Yeah. But They don't really specifically say that. And I think it's part of that sort of, it's the first moment of that sort of fever dream where it doesn't have to be explained. It doesn't have to make pure sense. She is being hunted. She's terrified she's being hunted. And her nightmare of what is about to happen comes true. And she is killed. So like for me, that's enough. That is enough explanation. She has this horrible fear of what's about to happen. Her fear comes true in a nightmarish way. That's enough. That's what the movie is, right?
Yeah. Now, why do you think, and maybe it's the same logic going through, like this is kind of like if you show up in a dream, you don't really know why you're there, but why do you think this girl was recruited to this school? Do you think that they're constantly recruiting and grooming new witches, and if they fall out or they're not the type, they kill them, kind of like the one girl that ran out at the end?
I mean, that if you only watch this movie on its own and don't go looking for explanations, I think that is definitely the impression you're going to get, that this school is recruiting likely girls that could become part of the coven. And if you get recruited and you fail or try to get away, then you'll die. You'll be killed. That's certainly the impression you get.
There was one moment where the lady that runs the covenant, the day-to-day, the manager, she does say to the main character, she does say to her, "Oh, you're stronger willed than we thought," or she has a moment like that or something, because they obviously they didn't know, like they don't want anybody resourceful or strong or has their own opinion or their own voice within there. The ending was really amazing too, when she kills the witch and she's running through the house and it's just collapsing and all falling apart, this whole thing. That was really cool, really well done.
What I get from it, and this is my own particular read of the material, so this is just my opinion, but the center of the, it was interesting. You talked about at one point, it felt like somebody going through a spider web, right? Mm-hmm. And I really feel like that's a great way to describe it. I hadn't thought of that before, but you're right. That is exactly what it is. And the spider at the center of the web is Mother Suspiriorum, that ancient witch, right? She's the spider at the center of this web. She is the source of the dark dream that they're all trapped in. So when she is attacked and stabbed, the dream starts collapsing. And so our girl is running out of this dream that is collapsing behind her, is how I read that moment.
How you interpret it.
Yeah.
So the little moments, like when they had to sleep in the lobby because there was the magnets falling through the roof, and they're sleeping in the gymnasium, and they put up those sheets.
Yeah.
And then at night they're trying to sleep, and then there's a red light going through, and then you see the outline, and you hear the witch breathing. And it's like she came down to sleep with them, like she's somehow absorbing their youth or their life force or something.
It's such a creepy scene.
Oh my God, it's so creepy.
So creepy.
And her friend was like, "This is the breath. I've heard this before, whatever." And they're kind of trying to count the steps of where they're going and where they're walking at night.
Yeah.
And they're, and she's drinking the wine, and their use of paint for blood, it has a different vibe and a different look. It's surreal. You don't have the same feeling like that if you're just locked in and there's a realistic kill and the fear of that. It's like there's something. It's almost like a cartoon, and the blood reflects all the colors and the lights in it, and everything is thick and it's visceral. So the art direction and everything in this movie was incredible. I mean, you're talking about 1967
crafted movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why I was agreeing with you that everything feels so intentional and so crafted, because the cinematography, the music, but again, what you're talking about, the art direction, everything feels so intentional that it's like every shot feels like a picture that somebody very deliberately crafted what was going to be in that photograph or that picture.
And within this movie and within the world, it's almost the logic of the dream is more important than the logic of the story.
Yes.
The dream comes first.
Yes, I agree with that.
And, something like this where they know what they're doing to you and they know what they're saying, whatever, it works. But this could go wrong. This could get out of control really easy.
One of the reasons I think Suspiria is a timeless classic, and I think it is Dario Argento's masterpiece. I think it is. Dario Argento made many things that I really appreciate, but Suspiria is his masterpiece. And it's because he is swinging for the fences and he connects full on with that bat. And that ball just sails out of the park. Because whenever you're swinging for what you're talking about, every time you swing for the fences, the power hitters are much more likely to strike out.
Yeah.
And this sort of movie where it is trying to craft the feeling of being in a nightmare dream.
Mm-hmm.
When it works, it's incredible. And most of the time it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Most of the time it fails. And I've seen a great many movies that try to do this and don't work. Yeah.
And there's nothing more claustrophobic or scaring to me, and kind of like going back to that spiderweb metaphor, when there's somebody new and fresh that enters a strange new world, and they're tangling themselves deeper and deeper into this web, but they don't know that they're doing it. And it's only till when the ball drops, the game has already been won. It's already checkmate, and they look back and they're deep into this world, and they were getting into it. Because the reality is like when she went to the front door and the lady runs out screaming, you know, that lady's already been condemned for death. There's like, she's already done. There's no way that she's going to escape that. And then there's that moment where does she just never come back to that school, or does she go into that school? And when you go into that school, you're entering the web. Now, because we're watching a horror movie, obviously, and we see this, we're like, don't go in the school, like stay out of it. And you see her just getting deeper and deeper because she's staying at a place outside of town with her friend. And they're like, no, we want you to come stay at the hotel, and you're going to come stay at the hotel. And they move her shit, and she's staying at the hotel. Oh, you know what? You know, you're not feeling well, you're sick, so we're going to give you food that you have to do every night. And also we want you to drink this wine every night. Yeah. And you see this and you're like, no. And it's like just pulling her deeper and deeper and deeper. And she has no idea she's getting pulled in.
Yep. That's that dream, that nightmare logic, right? Because one of the things that is true in nightmares, because I tend to be an active dreamer where while I'm dreaming, I'm also aware that I'm dreaming and watching the dream happen. And even when I'm aware that I'm in a dream and I'm aware of what's going on, if it's a nightmare, you can't stop yourself from doing it. That, like, you know, you the conscious part of you in the dream can be like, don't go in that house. It's a fucking demon house. Don't go in the house. And the character that you're following in the dream is going to go in that house anyway, right? You can't stop it from happening. So that's part of, I think, the nightmare of this movie is we're watching it exactly like what you're talking about. We're the active dreamer. We're the voice in the head going, don't eat that food. Don't drink that wine. Why are you staying there? That place is full of nightmares. But the character's going to do it anyway. You can't stop them. That is the dream logic of it.
Can I ask you a question? Do you active dream after you play Ouija boards?
Constantly. Yeah.
Man, you shaking the dark tree in the last podcast. So I'm just trying to, I'm glad we're not in the same room.
And I nothing bad keeps happening. So I'm going to continue to shake that dark tree.
You just fucking wait. They're gathering their forces. They're going to have fun with you. They're going to have fun with you.
My mother was telling me that I was trifling with demons when I was playing D&D like 35 years ago. Nothing bad has happened. I've had nothing but a string of success and happiness ever since. So I'm not scared of demons.
I'm just glad we do this podcast remote because demons aren't technologically savvy, so they don't. I'm nowhere near your. Yeah, they don't know we're doing this.
Well, when I come visit, when we do this live, I'm definitely bringing a Ouija board and some tarot cards and some black candles.
I won't let you in my house, dude.
I'm breaking the whole thing out. Me and Nash are going to be all over that Ouija board.
No, don't do that to my son. Not my son. Give me back my son. All right, so you were going to do your top 5 Italian horror movies of all time?
Well, before we do that, the next thing you should watch, and a lot of people. So I am a person who generally hates remakes, and I find most remakes unnecessary, and so I have a visceral reaction. And when they did a new Suspiria movie a few years back, a lot of the fans of the original Suspiria came out of the gate hating that they were doing it, hating the idea of it. But I think it is one of the few new versions of a classic movie like this that stands on its own. So the next thing you should watch when you get in the mood for a horror movie is the new version of Suspiria. It's got Tilda Swinton in it, Dakota Johnson, I forget who else is in it, but you should watch it because the thing that it does is it takes the idea of the original movie, and instead of trying to replicate the nightmare of the original movie, it plays it straight. It actually has a plot you can follow.
Yeah.
And it actually has a resolution to it. And I think because it doesn't try to replicate what the original was doing, it does something else with it. I think it stands on its own, and I think it's a worthy movie. I love Tilda Swinton, so I'll watch almost anything.
And that's savvy because if you're not a genius like Argento, if you don't, what he did, not a lot of people can pull off.
Yes.
And so if you were going
to, he can't pull it off every time.
Yeah,
because he has other movies where he tried to do the same thing and it didn't work.
This is the first one of a trilogy, right? The Mother's trilogy, and this is the first one.
So the Mother's trilogy is sort of a retcon. So he made this, and he talked about how he was going to do these movies about the three mothers, Mother Suspiria, Mother, I forget what the other two names are. Then later he did movies. Then people were like, oh, this must have been the second one because it. But I don't know. I don't know how deliberate that was. I mean, I've never obviously spoken to Dario Argento and asked him, but I don't know how deliberate that actually was, and I hesitate to call this a trilogy.
Right.
But if you want to check out the updated version, I think it's actually quite a good movie on its own.
Also, if we're talking about things to watch, I watched Black Phone the other day, and I really enjoyed it, and I'd love to do that movie on the podcast. And I know you enjoyed it as well.
I really did.
So. You sexy eight. I'm gonna start calling the sexy eight. Sexy eight. If you guys want to hang out with us when we talk about the movie, we're probably gonna do that here pretty soon. If you wanted to watch it, it's called The Black Phone, directed by Scott Derrickson.
Yeah.
And you're familiar with one of the writers on the screenplay, right?
We have interacted a few times. I asked him for a copy of the script.
Mm-hmm.
And when the movie came out, he sent me a copy, so I have the original script that I've read.
I'd like to read that.
Yeah, and I could ask. So his name is Robert Cargill. I could ask Cargill if he wants to come hang out with us. I don't know if he'd want to do that, but I'll certainly ask if he wants to come hang out and chat about the movie with us.
Right.
I thought it was great. I love Joe Hill's work. We've talked about Joe Hill many times, you and I.
Yeah.
He's one of my favorite current writers.
Yeah.
I think Cargill and Derrickson are a great team. I think the two of them have made a bunch of interesting stuff together. And I like that team up. I like the work that they're doing together. So we're not really doing a top 5, but I'm doing 5 Italian horror movies I think everyone should watch. This was sprung on me at the last minute, so forgive me. This isn't going to be real smooth. Obviously, Suspiria is number 1 on the list for me. I'm a big fan of Inferno. So if you're wanting it's more Dario Argento, Inferno is another one of his, which is, I think, another classic of his. Black Sabbath, which is Mario Bava. I talked about how Bava is another one of the big 3 for me. So the big 3 for me are Lucio Fulci, Mario Bava, and Dario Argento are my big 3 Italian horror directors from this time period. Black Sabbath is kind of a little bit of an anthology movie. It's got like 3 different stories in it. One of those 3 stories, when I was a kid and watched this, was the scariest fucking thing I'd ever seen. There is a story in Black Sunday. One of the 3 is a nurse steals a ring from a dead patient of hers and then is haunted by that patient. That thing creeped me the fuck out. That might be one of the scariest horror things I've ever seen when I was a kid. So Black Sunday, definitely check. Or Black Sabbath, excuse me, Black Sabbath. Also, but Black Sunday is another one of the ones that I was going to recommend. Black Sunday is a black and white film, very early Italian horror. Has Barbara Steele, who Barbara Steele's worth watching just on her own. Like, if you can watch a movie with Barbara Steele in it, just watch a movie with Barbara Steele in it. She's a special talent. But it's more about the murder of witches and then the payback the witches get later for having been murdered. And then I'm going to say that the last one I'm going to recommend. So I'm recommending this one not because I think it's the best Italian horror movie, but because it is the most insane Italian horror movie, is Zombie 2.
Oh, yeah.
Zombie 2 is fucking insane. It is a weird 1970s zombie film that kind of mixes Caribbean zombies, but also flesh-eating zombies in a really weird, kind of nonsensical way, and includes the greatest zombie scene ever put in a film.
Yeah.
So Zombie 2, check. Yes, the shark.
Yeah.
So if you, I don't want to spoil it, but watch Zombie 2 for the greatest zombie attack that has ever happened in film. So if you're just looking for 5 recommendations, that would be my 5. Hey, and we want to remind you guys, if you have a minute and don't hate Wes's face, drop us a comment, give us a like. If you feel like subscribing to Tying That Guy on YouTube or the other places where you can subscribe to things, please do that too. Because every time somebody doesn't do that, Wes assumes that you hate his face. and we don't want to make Wes cry.
Every time there's a like and subscribe, Joseph gets his wings.
Yes.
Ding.
All right. Thanks for hanging out with us. Let us know what you think about Black Phone and when you'd like us to do it. And hopefully we get a chance for everybody to see it before we talk about it. Say goodbye, Ty.
Goodbye, Ty.